Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Stenton. I'm Laura Keim, and this afternoon we're going to have a look at Deborah Norris Logan, who's in the third generation of Logan family residents at Stenton, having moved here in 1783 after her 1781 marriage to Dr. George Logan. And we'll just start by talking about her portrait for a few minutes. There are several of these in other collections. It seems that her portrait was one that her descendants wanted to own, wanted to have copies of her likeness, and this is one of those. The original was by the artist Charles Willson Peale, who was her friend and neighbor, in fact. He lived at Belfield Farm, just up the road from here. It's now part of the LaSalle University campus. And Deborah reports actually having first sat for the portrait in 1815. And she says that she and her niece Debbie Norris, walked over to Charles Willson Peale's and spent some time in his painting room with pleasure. He has 3 portraits lately painted, very good likenesses, and offers to take mine. And a little bit more time passes. She's not so keen really on this process of portrait painting. So not until 1818 does she sit again. She says, "I should not have consented to it, but he," meaning Peale, "used a little management. Tomorrow I'm to go again. It sets heavy upon my mind. I'm not pleased with it at all. But if others are, I must forget myself." And as you can see, she's not terribly attentive to portrait painting. Peale actually leaves, sells Belfield in 1821 and moves back into Philadelphia. But in 1825, so almost a full 10 years from when she first agreed to having her portrait painted, she goes into town and picks up a little entourage to go with her to finish having the portrait painted. But prior to the finishing process, actually in 1821, backing up just a bit, she says, "Today I paid C.W. Peale $100 for my portrait, which it is my own fault is still unfinished." So as you can tell, she's recording in her diary that she would never particularly really liked this likeness, and she says that she being 64 by the time it's done, Peale being 82 and not wearing his spectacles, which clearly troubled her, that was part of the process. She felt this had just not captured a really good recording of her likeness. And we have record that Maria Dickinson Logan, her great-granddaughter, inherited this portrait. Maria was a colonial dame and records that she herself cut out the face of the original portrait and burned it in the stove in the back dining room at Stenton during a colonial dames meeting. So we're just so sorry we don't actually have the original portrait of Deborah by Charles Willson Peale, but really enjoy these likenesses greatly. And there's also a silhouette of her. It's actually a silken silhouette that survives in the private collection of a Logan descendant who lives in England. So you can see perhaps it's her very long hair wrapped up in the back, kind of holding her cap, which is probably that same sort of puff of hair represented by the cap in the portrait. But this is some Deborah's appearance more toward the end of her life. Turning to a dress that survives in the collection at Stenton, we have a glimpse at youthful Deborah. And she was not very tall. She had relatively small stature. And so having someone's dress really kind of captures a sense of their physicality. And this would have been very high style when Deborah was a young woman in the early 1780s. Probably, maybe even this dress was kind of leading up to the time that she would have married Dr. George Logan in 1781. And we do know that she was known to be called Saucy Debbie. So she was someone who had kind of a sharp wit and certainly probably was a lot of fun at parties when she was a young woman. But it's a light cotton that's embroidered, and you get a sense of its very high, what we know as the kind of empire waist, this Grecian style, very fashionable, light, airy gown. And when Deborah was a young woman and young girl, she grew up primarily in her father's commodious townhouse on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, not too far from the State House or Independence Hall. And it was her brother had to sell the property after he inherited, her brother Joseph Parker Norris. And the Second Bank of the United States is on the same lot today. So Stenton is fortunate actually to have a number of kind of fun things related to Deborah's life as a generator of writing and recorder of other writings. And we know she spent quite a lot of her time in these pursuits, particularly later in her life. But just to start with a sense of sort of practicality, and I'm suspecting because these seem to represent the late 1790s, 97, 98, and 99, this receipt book that we have maybe details some of the financial management she was doing while her husband was away in France at that time in 1798 on his kind of famous mission abroad as a pseudo-ambassador, when he really should not have taken on duties to go in this official capacity without the government's sanction. She was also a poet, and this is a photo reproduction, but one of her poems is the sonnet to Stenton, which she wrote here in March of 1815. She starts out, "My peaceful home." So she was very happy here. We have another original poem in our collection, "Lines Written in Old Age." Her handwriting is really quite distinctive and very easy to read. So she left 18 volumes of a diary from 1811 to approaching her death in 1839. Most of those volumes are at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, but one is at the Library Company of Philadelphia. And many of the other, a lot of her correspondence is also at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. But one of the things she's well known for, and actually she became the first female member of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania in the 1820s, in the decade of their founding, because she cataloged a lot of old James Logan's papers that she found here in a cupboard up behind the buffet cupboard, the parlor buffet cupboard downstairs. And this is one such letter. You can see James Logan's sort of intense kind of scrawl to Josiah Martin, a bookseller in London. And Deborah gives it it's as if she's creating her own little finding aid description, calling it a curious letter from James Logan to Josiah Martin in London, with whom he had corresponded on subjects of literature for some time, but at length discovered him to be a pretender, so much more learning than he really possessed. And Deborah really liked things also that reminded her of other people, and maybe scratched out. It belonged to D. Logan, who could have used it to store it probably had a set of tools that went with it, like sewing tools and things. Or is it Dr. Logan, and it may have had things like even scalpels or medical tools. So that's a little bit unclear. So Deborah really enjoyed objects for their power to conjure up people in her life, or times that had passed, or to connect her to things that had happened. Sort of the idea of object as mnemonic device, in effect. And this is sort of something she shared with other antiquarians, others who lived in Germantown. And John Fanning Watson, whom you can see his photographic portrait here, was one such person. And he's well known for authoring the Annals of Philadelphia. But he started out working on his manuscript by coming to see Deborah. And literally, she helped write the book. So this is all Watson's handwriting. And then here is Deborah's actual insertion, her own commentary on Susanna Wright of Wright's Ferry out on the Susquehanna River, and some of the silk that was processed or made from the silk worms that she raised. And that's included in the annals. So in honor of their friendship, Watson gave Deborah a little relic box, which he gave about 25 of these to various people, the people in the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and others of kind of who would appreciate such a snuff box, is how they referred to them. But it includes elm from the treaty tree. And you might sort of recognize this tree for those of you who know the painting by Benjamin West, Penn's Treaty with the Indians. You can imagine the Indians and settlers gathering. That was said to have happened in 1682. And this tree fell down in a great windstorm early in the 19th century. And so Watson felt it was important to commemorate it through these bits of relic wood. And there's another little Penn's Treaty tree relic box, very small, that was also presented to Deborah Norris Logan, Penn's Treaty Unbroken Faith, 1682. And inside is a little bead of wampum. And on the back, we see that the bead in the box was sent S.M. Walker from the belt in the archives at Harrisburg. On presenting it to dear Aunt Logan, she expressed her pleasure by saying she valued, and I'm not sure, she valued it more highly than gold and would place it in the treaty tree box. So that passage of the bit of wampum, I think I may have laid my iPad down across the room that had a picture, and I wanted to show. The bead was placed in the box by a woman, S.M. Walker, who turns out to be Sarah M. Walker, one of these young women in this kind of almost entourage of younger ladies who spent a lot of time with Deborah here at Stenton, and included Sarah Walker, who would eventually move to Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. Her daughter, or rather her niece, Mary Logan, and also her niece Hepsy is very much, is quite youthful, young at the end of Deborah's life, and spends a lot of time here at Stenton. But this short gown in the collection at Colonial Williamsburg has this tag saying that had belonged to Aunt Logan, given to Emily, who is actually probably a female historian of Susquehanna County, Emily Blackman, by cousin Sarah M. Walker. And we have a portrait also of Sarah for you to see. So Deborah really was a kind of mentoring historian as well, and she helped to sort of kind of cultivate this interest in preservation in women that would come after her, and then her own memory being kind of, it's almost as if she could become a relic. This is a little bit of her hair. She died at 78 years old with quite kind of white hair at the time, wiry hair at the time. And we also have a few things from after Deborah died. So her funeral would have taken place here at Stenton, and she would have been buried in the cemetery out behind the house, which she created that for when her husband George died. And I'm not sure this is going to. You can see how it looked early on with this wall surrounding it. So in our collection, we're fortunate to have two of these invitations to her funeral. This one went to Israel Cope. Israel Cope and family are particularly requested to attend her funeral, second month, third day of 1839, and it would have been delivered in this kind of watered, watered papered envelope. So I just, through my iPad, wanted to point out a few other things related to Deborah that are in other collections. So one of the things that's in the State Archives in Harrisburg is this family record book, in which she lays down all this ancestry and genealogy related to both the Logan and Norris families. And I wanted to also point out to you that we've been finding just amazing things in her papers just by going down to the Historical Society here in the Belfield Papers is one of her little pocket almanacs, where we learned that Dinah died the 21st of February in 1805 and was buried in the garden here at Stenton 2 days later, as she had requested. And Deborah is also the person who recorded the first version of the Dinah story. So she kept this biographical sketches of the life and character of Dr. George Logan, which was not published until 1899 by granddaughter Fanny Armat Logan, but in it includes a description of the story of the saving of Stenton. It doesn't name Dinah specifically, it simply refers to an old domestic and an old woman. But this story of Dinah saving Stenton from burning by the British in 1777. And so we know so many stories about life at Stenton and about regional history because she fed them to John Fanning Watson, and they're included in the annals. This is a woman who in the 1820s really helped to shape our memory of kind of early national Philadelphia. But she also was a bit of an editor. She really didn't want things to appear that she didn't consider to put her family in a positive light. And so there's Gary Nash reports in First City an incident between her and John Fanning Watson where she's not happy about a John Dickinson letter that he wanted to include in the annals. So we know she had a kind of somewhat idealistic vision, maybe you would even say a very early colonial revival vision for how she wanted the past to be remembered. And we remember her today and always at Stenton for this contribution that she makes to our knowledge of the past. And we like to go back to the original sources, to her letters, her diaries, always learning more about life at Stenton every time we dig in. So thanks very much for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And next Friday afternoon, we will also be doing a program on Zoom, actually, on historic house museums. We have Donna Harris, Ken Torino, and Max Van Balgoy coming to talk about their recent historic house museum publications, and I will be moderating a discussion. So I hope you can join us next Friday afternoon as well, and look for our notices on Facebook to sign up. Thank you.